It's hard to believe that someone could slip in and abduct a young woman right out of her bedroom without anybody hearing a thing. But that's what happened.
All right, so let's roll sound. And ABC.
We're good, Stephanie.
When we talk about the golden age of serial killers, it all started in the early to mid 70s with this group of 5. Like Gacy and 33 bodies under his house. Bundy traveling across the country. Rader terrorizing over decades and taunting law enforcement and the media. Jeffrey Dahmer, even today, we find his crimes to be on the extreme end of human behavior. Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, confessed to 71 murders over the course of several decades.
5 of the most prolific serial killers in American history were all operating at the same time.
It was easy for us in hindsight to say, well, why didn't that person get caught, or why weren't people looking for them? I think we have to keep in mind historically the era.
In the 70s in the United States was an innocent sort of place.
You find this sort of trusting environment.
It was normal for people to just hang out with strangers and to hop into strange cars.
The murder of people in series has police departments across this country worried.
Law enforcement didn't have a definition for serial killers.
Those police officers back in the 70s just simply did not have the tools that law enforcement officers have now.
Being able to quickly run a name in a database, that's something that didn't exist.
There were no computers.
No internet.
No cell phones.
No DNA. There were no surveillance cameras.
Record keeping was in the back of everybody's drawer.
We didn't yet have the 911 system.
And these killers took full advantage of that.
John Wayne Gacy's
Bundy is still alive.
BTK.
Jeffrey Dahmer.
Green River Killer.
Georgianne Hawkins.
Stephen Toomey.
And Catherine Wright.
Stephen Jonathan.
Jamie Doss. Terry Lillishawn. Shirley Vian.
He took me by the shoulder and said, "Follow me." Threatened to kill me if I didn't comply.
I thought that he was just a normal man, and I was just thinking I'm gonna get home and everything's gonna be fine. Little did I know it was gonna be my worst nightmare.
We kept trying to tell him, but he's a kid. He's a kid. He said, well, he's telling us he's not a kid. So who should we believe? Believe the white guy.
These 5 killers don't come across to the outside world as frothing lunatics.
You could sit next to them on a bus or a train or a plane. You would never associate them with being the worst serial killers in U.S. history.
Deep down inside is a monster that you could never see.
My mother had told me that the only thing she ever prayed for herself was to die peacefully in her sleep. And that's the one thing she did not get.
Wichita was a very calm city, a city back in 1974 of roughly 300,000 people with a large agricultural base. We didn't think about crime. Nobody thought about crime. Crime happened in the big city. Crime did not happen in Wichita, Kansas.
My family was a loving, caring family of typical Americans. My mother and my father were childhood sweethearts. My mom was a good Catholic girl. That's why there's 5 of us, one after the other after the other. remember walking home. I remember the snow being almost knee-deep. Opened up the back gate to the yard, and I saw my dog Lucky outside. So I said, "Hey, Lucky, what are you doing out here, boy? You okay? Come on." I opened up the kitchen door, and there was no sound, nobody. And so I was like, I yelled out, "Is anybody here?" And one of my siblings yelled out, "Charlie, come quick. Mom and Dad are playing a bad trick on us." I ran down the hall, went through the door in their bedroom, and saw my mom and my dad there tied up and dead. I could smell the fear and the pain that they had gone through. I could feel it all in the room. The physical pain is like if somebody pried your chest open.
Well, I confronted the family, pulled a pistol in front of Mr. Otero. There I realized that I didn't have a mask on or anything. They already could ID me, and made a decision to go ahead and cut him down, I guess, or strangle him. I had never strangled anyone before, so I really didn't know how much pressure you had to put on a person or how long it would take.
The police had responded to the house. They opened a spare bedroom, and that's where they found Joey Jr.
The police believe that he sat in the chair and watched the child suffocate. And every time I think about that, it's tough, you know?
So then the search was on for Josephine. That's when the officers realized this house has a basement. And the officer went down there. He didn't know where the lights were. And he kind of sweeping his arm, trying to not bump into something. And he went against something that he thought was a punching bag hanging from the ceiling. And then when he found the light, it was Josephine, who had been hung from a sewer pipe in the basement of the house.
She will really struggle. And then as she struggles, he will describe masturbating.
If I'd have seen Joey and Josie, I might have drove me mad. Thank God I didn't see it, thank God.
Crime scenes back in the 70s are not like they are now. The Otero crime scene, that is a crime scene that would never happen today. You had members of the media wandering through the house. You even had a higher-up official in the police department decide to make himself a drink of water. And so he had left the ice tray on the counter. And so people thought, well, the ice hadn't melted completely, so that must have been the killer who did it.
Back in 1974, we couldn't even spell DNA. The technology didn't exist back then. But at Josephine's feet, there was a pool. The crime scene investigator had incredible imagination because he didn't know what it was. He didn't know what its value was, but he knew he wanted to preserve it. So he took a pillowcase and he cut it up into several small pieces, and then he dipped it in that pool. 31 years later, a genetic profile would be drawn from one of those preserved pieces of evidence.
The police department thought at first that this was a drug murder. They took several people into custody. It turned out they weren't related to the case at all.
In 1974, the idea that someone would kill for pleasure was unheard of. It just wasn't something that existed in anyone's mind.
There had to be some motive. Why does somebody just pick out this family and slaughter 4 people? And so a lot of opinions were sought from the psychologists of the day, thinking that they would have some insight as to what would motivate a person to do this.
Dennis Rader, as a child, had a perfectly normal upbringing. He said, I was never abused. Everything was normal in my family. But then he says, I knew from a young age that I had Factor X. Factor X is the demon inside of me, he says, that caused me to have to torture people and kill people.
Can you pinpoint when you knew that there was a problem coming?
Well, I would say probably even when I was in probably grade school, I started having problems.
And what kind of problems were those?
All males probably go through some kind of sexual fantasies. Mine were just a little bit weirder than other people.
Rader will describe a specific incident when he was a kid where he was at some kind of family outing and they tied a chicken to a tree stump in order to kill the chicken. And the tying of the chicken to that stump caused him to have what he would describe as sexual feelings.
Anyway, I think somewhere along the line I knew, probably by the time I was in 8th grade, but they exploded on January 15th, 1974. That's when the ball came to explode.
Dennis Rader was cultivating this persona of churchgoer. He was married. He was relatively young. He was 28 years old, relatively handsome. So he should have everything going for him. And so when he loses this job in 1973, things weren't perfect. He was not in control. And some ways that people may try to overcorrect for that is by gaining control in some other aspect of their life. And, you know, perhaps it triggered his need to control something or someone.
When the Otero family was killed, the way he tells it, he was between jobs, was bored, didn't feel good about himself, so Factor X came out.